Do you think Shedeur knew they wanted to make an example out of him?
I don't think he realized to the extent that the NFL would go to make an example out of him. No, I don't think he knew that. I don't think his dad knew the extent.
What if one of the NFL's most promising young talents was purposefully blackballed rather than merely ignored? Shedeur Sanders is not merely a name that shows up on a draft board. Even before it plays a single game in the league, it dominates headlines, sells out stadiums, and earns tens of millions in endorsements. However, Hall of Famer Eric Dickerson claims that the NFL didn't simply ignore Shedeur. They apparently attempted to send a message, a subtle warning, to every player who establishes a reputation, displays affluence, or questions the league's hierarchy. We continue to run this. Private phone conversations are said to have taken place behind the scenes. Teams became disheartened, and a deliberate attempt was made to make an example out of one young man who had too much confidence for the old NFL rather than to find the finest potential. The team that picked him might have only done so to avoid being discovered, which is the most astounding aspect of all.
What about it? But every owner is very, very selfish. Now, why would I do something to my detriment? Like if I need a quarterback and I think this kid is it, what he didn't realize is the guys that have fallen in the draft before, they all had unusual traits. Like they had some superstar qualities to them. Now, some other things happened that made them fall, but Shedeur and his family, they overplayed their hand. Them thinking that he was in the same evaluation mode as Eli Manning.
This is not a fan-concocted theory. It originates directly from within the league. What actually transpired with Shedeur Sanders on draft night, then? And who is responsible for the attempt to deprive rising stars of their influence? Shedeur Sanders did more than just play football as soon as he set foot on the college field. He assumed control. Not only because of his last name, but also because of his accuracy, poise, and capacity for composure under duress. He wasn't ostentatious to get attention. He was ostentatious because he had evidence to support it. And that ought to have greatly increased his draft stock in today's game. Shedeur was prepared for the NFL by every measure. He had the national attention, the leadership, the statistics, and possibly most importantly, the numbers that drive business. Sales of jerseys in Colorado broke records. Every time he performed, ratings skyrocketed and brands gathered at his door.
And I'll tell you this much here, what I heard from someone that's in the NFL, that the NFL told other, don't draft him, do not draft him. We're gonna make an example out of him. And this came from a very good source. And he said that, I won't say who, somebody called the Cleveland Browns and said, don't do that.
Shedeur reportedly made over $30 million in nil trades before draft day ever came. More money than the majority of rookies make throughout their whole careers. When a 21-year-old quarterback is strolling the red carpet, flashing expensive watches, and trending harder than half of the league starters, some see a superstar, but others see a problem. This kind of leverage makes people uneasy, especially in a sport based on control. Insiders claim that the NFL wanted to stop him before he even started because of this issue. Nobody anticipated that a Hall of Fame icon would make the most significant claim of the offseason, but Eric Dickerson did just that. In a recent podcast interview, Dickerson asserted that he had a first-hand conversation with a senior NFL source who was aware of the actual events that took place during the draft. He claims that Shedeur Sanders' talent was not the reason why several clubs were advised not to choose him.
They were forced into drafting him because somebody made a call to them, said, and I say, when I say this is a NFL side source for sure, so this is not hearsay. Look, one thing about it is, and I'll just say it, they don't like when guys have brands, especially black players. And that's mostly us with the brand. We kind of, some guys are flashy and all that kind of stuff. They don't like that.
The league supposedly sought to use him as an example, not because of his character. In other words, we're going to use him as an example. Dickerson went on to allege that the Cleveland Browns received a particular call urging them to don't do it. Avoid drafting him. Pushing Shedeur down the board wasn't the only objective. It was to ensure that he was not selected at all. Because it would completely upend the NFL's established power structure if a player like Shedeur, young, well-liked, self-assured, and earning millions before even entering the league, could thrive on his own terms. Furthermore, this was not conjecture based on a hearsay on social media. These were straightforward accusations made by a reputable veteran who had nothing to gain from disclosing this information. However, the deeper cause of it is where things become even more sinister. Shedeur Sanders was more than just a sportsman. He was already a movement, a business, and a pro to some.
Fred, I don't think you knew this. He had already made $17 million from a car deal that he already signed. A car deal. He had $17 million already for that. Then he had another 14, I think, from was it a shoe, Nike or some shoe deal.
He had already secured a car sponsorship contract apparently worth $17 million and another huge shoe deal supposedly worth more than $14 million before the NFL even called his name. That is more than $30 million in earnings from personal brands. The amount of money that makes rookie contracts seem insignificant. League insiders were raising their eyebrows over more than simply the money. It was the picture. Shedeur arrived wearing fancy clothing. He had on a dime. And they weren't prepared for it precisely. However, the story changes when they react to that power. It initially appeared to be one of those draft-related incidents. A prized talent is doing worse than anticipated. Perhaps a poor interview here, a dubious criticism there occurs frequently, doesn't it? However, things felt different when it came to Shedeur Sanders. Too dissimilar. Several teams, including the Steelers, who had openly complimented him abruptly dropped him. Analysts hurried to provide general criticisms to support it. He can't throw far enough or isn't mobile enough. However, viewers have seen the same highlights. He possessed the arm, the footwork, and the critical moments. How therefore, can a quarterback like that get up in the later rounds? Then came Eric Dickerson's strong assertions that Shedeur wasn't intended to be drafted at all since someone in the league made that obvious. Not just one team made the decision to pass. Teams were purportedly told to do this. Dickerson claims that insiders were instructed to let him fall. Let this serve as a caution to others. To be clear, the NFL has not confirmed this. However, when a Hall of Famer claims it originated from a reliable source and the draft pattern supports that claim, it's difficult to dismiss it as coincidence or paranoia because the Cleveland Browns' subsequent move generated even more questions. Dickerson claimed that the strategy was straightforward. Avoid drafting Shedeur Sanders. Allow him to fall out entirely. Set an example for all upcoming players who dare to appear with an excessively large brand and a loud personality. And for a brief while, it appeared that the plan was effective, but then an odd event occurred. Shedeur was unexpectedly selected by the Cleveland Browns, who had already selected a quarterback previously in the draft. Despite claiming not to intend to, Dickerson claims that it wasn't because they desired him. It was due to a phone call. A move that appears to be support but may have been a cover-up. Take him late, put his name on a draft card, and steer clear of a major collusion scandal, the Fury. Because it would have been too clear if no one had chosen him. However, the league might declare, see, nothing shady here. If a team caught him late, here's the twist though. Everyone was aware that it was illogical. Cleveland didn't require Shedeur. However, they captured him. Not early, not mid, but far enough down to convey a message, harm his reputation, and reduce the value of his contract. Ugly below, yet polished on the outside. The tone changed after the draft. All of a sudden, Shedeur's face was everywhere from the same league that supposedly didn't want him. In a matter of hours, his shirts were sold out. He appeared in team content, media campaigns, and promotional images. For commercial purposes only, the NFL embraced the hype. Things revealed a different picture behind the scenes. There were rumors that the Browns had no intention of playing Shedeur in the first game. He only saw the field because of an injury, which was a chance he didn't request but fully took advantage of. With the spotlight shining even brighter and the pressure overwhelming, Shedeur stood up and delivered. Unquestionable evidence that talent was never a problem. Nevertheless, it was evident that the league was more than eager to capitalize on his reputation, promote his tale, and use his image. However, their enthusiasm seemed to end there when it comes to genuinely supporting his professional path. They wanted to restrain him rather than lift him. And one reality started to surface as Shedeur began to win over fans game by game. They certainly didn't want him to rise, and they didn't think he would persevere. Fans quickly began making the connections. Shedeur was strangely passed over by the same teams that had openly complimented him prior to the draft, such as the Pittsburgh Steelers. He passed round after round despite having excellent interviews, excellent reports, and obvious need at the quarterback position. Nothing added up after the dust settled. The reasons were no longer acceptable to the fans. He is unable to throw far. On game footage, he disproved them. He is immobile. Even though he wasn't Lamar Jackson, he was more than capable of making plays and getting out of the pocket. Critics attempted to portray him as overrated, but the statistics, victories, and influence revealed otherwise. Even well-known veterans like Asante Samuel disagreed with NFL voices like Chris Carter over the storyline. Samuel openly stood up for Shedeur, criticizing the league's prejudice and hypocrisy. Thousands of supporters agreed, believing a bigger issue was at work. It has nothing to do with performance. It was about positioning, keeping power out of the hands of players with their own voices, brands, and influence and in the hands of franchises. And now that covert control mechanism was being revealed, the crowd weren't keeping quiet, which was the most potent aspect. This went beyond a single draft. Selection. Power was at issue. Who possesses it? Who is permitted to keep it? And what happens if a young, self-assured, and shamelessly self-made individual challenges the system? Brand control is the foundation of the NFL's business. For many years, the league molded the stories, chose the stars, and determined who was in the public eye. However, players such as Shedeur Sanders turned that model upside down. Shedeur didn't need the NFL's approval to become well-known because he had a Hall of Fame father as his coach, a sizable social media following, and commercial ventures unrelated to any professional contract had much too much power going into the draft, which unnerved executives. Thus, it wasn't merely conjecture when Eric Dickerson stated that they intended to use him as an example. T was a reflection of a long-standing issue with how the league handles players who have their own opinions, particularly when those players are young, black, and unwilling to follow traditional standards. His personality was beyond their control. His style could not be silenced. Insiders allege that by publicly humiliating him, they attempted to regain control in the only manner they could. What became of Shedeur Sanders? Is there only one young quarterback who is being overlooked in the draft? The NFL's outdated structure and a new breed of players who recognize their worth before the league does are at odds at this pivotal moment. The signs are obvious, regardless of how well coordinated the purported cooperation was. They might not celebrate you if you enter the NFL too early and with too much strength. They may attempt to make you smaller. Shedeur and ... He brought more than simply statistics. Without ever taking a professional photo, he brought independence, millions of endorsements, viral moments, and a sizable audience. That is a threat rather than a player for a league that is based on product control. Here's the twist, though. Shedeur continues to rise despite power apparently acting against him, has become a symbol of something far greater, won over supporters, and exceeded expectations. There is more to this than just football. It's about the struggle between youthful athletes changing the rules in real time and established systems attempting to preserve control. Therefore, what happened to Shedeur Sanders is not the true question.